France that they would go through as they would have recovery from each printing. Are we going to see in the United States then, as we have stimulus package after stimulus package, just a variety of stages of inflation that we'll go through as we see recoveries, happen, even though they may roll over?
Well, we're not going to get any recoveries. I mean, we might get something that the government claims is a recovery. We might get some kind of bounce in GDP, but it's simply going to be a function of spending more borrowed money. And so if the government says, hey, we got the GDP to go up, by 1 percentage point, but we increase the debt by $2 trillion or $3 trillion to produce that little bit of GDP growth, we're worse off. We're not better off, but they never look at the debt. They just think, well, can we get some spending? Can we get Americans to buy more stuff? And if we succeed, that means our economy is expanding. The more the government succeeds in getting us to spend more money by going into debt, the worse they make the problem. And so we get a little bit of a bounce, and then we're back in recession, and things are collapsing again. And now we've got a bigger problem to deal with because we've taken on even more debt to buy us a little bit of time.
In the interview with Dr. Mark Faber last week, he said that he expected the U.S. to do more stimulus packages, Peter, rather than let the stock market go to new lows. And last time you commented in the last interview that we have already overdosed on stimulus packages. And I believe Mark's right. I believe the government will continue to have stimulus package after stimulus package. Is that the road to hyperinflation that we're watching this real time?
Exactly. Well, that's ultimately the complete overdose on stimulus is hyperinflation. That's the analogy would be, a heroin addict finally dying of an overdose because he takes so much heroin. A monetary overdose is hyperinflation. And, the stimulus started a long time ago. Well, first of all, remember Bush's stimulus. They sent out those $200 or $300 stimulus checks. It didn't work. The economy went into recession despite the stimulus. And at the time he did that, not only was I against the stimulus, but I said, look, they're just going to do a bigger stimulus because they're going to say the reason it didn't work is because the stimulus wasn't big enough. And that's always going to be the reason. More stimulus, more stimulus, more stimulus. And the more they stimulate, the worse the problem gets because that's what they're stimulating. They're not stimulating real economic growth, stimulating the problem. They're stoking the fire.
What about the economy, Peter? Because we have cash for clunkers and stimulus, which in the government's mind is designed to help the economy. But Austrian economists have problems with this type of intervention. So what is the reality of the economy?
Well, cash for clunkers is an example of the worst possible thing the government can do. Think about what cash for clunkers is. The U.S. government goes deeper into debt, right? We're already in a lot of debt. The government borrows more money from Japan and from China and gives it to American citizens to encourage them to destroy the cars that they already own, the cars that they've already paid for. They don't have any more car loans against these cars. They're fully paid for cars. They work. They're able to drive them. And this money says, here, we'll give you this money on the condition that you destroy the car that you own and take out a car loan, go into debt, commit to a car payment that right now you don't have. And so what we're doing is we're destroying working assets and going deeper into debt. Why would we want to do that when we're suffering from too much debt? We're in a recession. The economy is weak. Why should we be destroying our clunkers? We should be driving these clunkers until the engines fall out. We don't have the money for new cars. We just shouldn't be buying. When you're broke, right, if you lose your job, you don't decide to put in a swimming pool in your house. You've got to save your money. You've got to be frugal. We need to be frugal with our resources. We can't squander them buying ourselves brand new cars. And a lot of these brand new cars, where are we getting them? They're from Japan. We're running up the trade deficit. I mean, it's crazy.
With regards to Warren Buffett's recent comments, because you've been critical of some of his ideas with regards to short-term inflation, would you mind elaborating on that, on some of your criticisms of what Buffett's had to say recently?
Well, Buffett basically is speaking out of two sides of his mouth because on the one hand, he's saying we have to be worried about inflation and a weak dollar. And on the other hand, he's applauding Congress and the president for the actions they've taken that are the reason that we have to worry about inflation and a weak dollar. So he can't have it both ways. If he's worried about inflation and the weak dollar, he's got to oppose the stimulus. He's got to be against President Obama. He's got to be against Congress. He can't keep telling the government, do whatever it takes to get us out of this mess when everything they're doing is simply creating inflation. See, apparently Warren Buffett thinks that inflation is a problem, but he thinks it's worth it. He thinks creating inflation is going to be worth the long-term pain, that the short-term gain of the inflation is worth the long-term pain of enduring it. But that's not true. And also to think that Buffett is saying that what the government is doing is getting us out of our economic mess, that they're saving the economy. They're not saving it. They're killing it. We don't need more debt. That's not how, turn around. In fact, Buffett even talked about the problems of all the debt that we have and how this is the problem. Well, if he's worried about debt, why is he applauding Congress's effort to lead us deeper into debt? We're taking on trillions of dollars of new debt that we didn't have before. And it's not necessary because it's not helping us restore a healthy economy. We're just borrowing money and spending it. We're blowing it on more consumption, and we're using it to expand government. Now, that's the worst thing we can do, because the bigger we make government, the less productive we're going to be. So if we had a problem before, we got an even bigger one now because we've got more government standing in our way.
Can you update us on your thoughts on the housing market? Because the government put out a recent report the other day saying that housing sales were up, and some of this is seasonal factors. But what is the reality of the housing situation, Peter?
Well, look, Americans overspent on housing, obviously. Home prices are still too high. They're going to keep falling in real terms. The market is not bottoming. Just because there's a slight bump up in sales from much depressed levels, it doesn't mean the situation is going to turn around. You've got a lot of stimulus money, remember, going into the housing market. You have the FHA now giving away home mortgages with 3% down. And, of course, with the first-time home buyer's tax credit, which means anyone who hasn't bought a home in the last 2 or 3 years, they can get credit. Generally, that credit now can be given up front, so it will cover your 3% down. So you have a lot of people now who can buy low-cost housing with no down payments, and that's really what's going on. If you look at where the new sales are, it's in the low part of the market. That's where people are buying with zero down. This is how we got into this mess. So you've got the government subsidizing more home buying, so you have more people that are going to be getting in over their head in houses. When the market turns down, these are just future defaults. We're digging a hole deeper in the housing market right now. Meanwhile, because of all these subsidies, the home builders are still building houses. We want them to stop building houses, but we're adding supply to an already saturated market because the government refuses to let the market function. And if the government stayed out of it, housing prices would be falling and home builders would stop building. But they want people to they think we need to build homes because it's economic activity. But it's a waste of activity. We don't need to build homes when we have a record supply of vacant homes.
You were asked on Fox News about how the brakes would be applied when the time came, and you stated, quote, well, unfortunately, they really can't be put on at this point. We're just going to go over the edge of a cliff. The time to put on the brakes is long past. We're going to have to deal with the damage, end quote. Can you elaborate on that, Peter?
Yeah, well, they're talking about Alan Greenspan as like, Ben Bernanke stepping on the brakes before the inflation becomes a problem. Well, my point is that the lines have been cut. There are no brakes anymore. My thing is now we just have to brace for the impact. But if we don't brace for the impact, we're just going to all die in the crash. And, so we have to understand that we've already made all the mistakes. Yes, we do have to step on the brake in that we have to raise interest rates and we have to get a handle on this. But we're already going to suffer from the fact that we've left them too low for too long. And the inflation has already been created. The genie is out of the bottle. You can't just snap your fingers and the genie's back in the bottle and hasn't done any damage.
I'm kind of backtracking here just a bit, Peter, but you have senior citizens, as you know, on fixed incomes, and you're talking about running for Congress, so I'm just going to come at you with this. But I'm trying to ask you again, basically, how unethical is it that we're creating this tremendous inflation when there's this harm that you're doing to senior citizens and the elderly, many of whom don't have savings, and they just live, Social Security check to Social Security check, and it's hard enough for these people, Peter, and now they're going to be, starving from some of this? I mean, this is the problem.
Well, the government doesn't have the money to make the Social Security payments. I mean, that's part of the problem. Social Security is one of the reasons that the country is in such a hole, because we've been borrowing money to finance this Ponzi scheme for so many years. The money that the people who are collecting Social Security from now, that money was embezzled years ago by the government and spent. There's no money there. The trust funds have nothing. So the government has to go into debt to make these payments. And so Social Security payments aren't going to be made. My solution would be to try to find a way, not even privatize it, just try to reform the program so that the people who really, really need it right now, who are completely dependent on it, continue to get it, but that everybody else kind of gets phased out. Because otherwise, no one's going to get anything. If we don't get a handle on this program and understand that, it was a fraud from the beginning, that Bernie Madoff is in jail for a reason, and that reason is that Ponzi schemes don't work. And they don't work when done by Bernie Madoff, and they don't work when done by Social Security. You can't run an investment program on a Ponzi dynamic. And, and we have to change that, or no one's going to get anything, and we're going to destroy the currency trying to maintain the pyramid.
Peter, what are your thoughts on the monetary system worldwide? Are most all global paper currencies in trouble to some degree?
Well, of course, the world monetary system would be on much sounder footing if we actually had some money behind it. But unfortunately, all the currencies are fiat. They're not backed by anything. And that's the way politicians like it, because it lets them play Santa Claus. It lets them promise